Hi, everyone. Welcome to News Take. My name is David Chavern. I'm the president and CEO of the News Media Alliance. If this is your first time joining us, News Take is where we try to dive deep into some, frankly, wonky conversations with people who are working hard to help the news industry to grow and evolve, particularly on the product and innovation side. We've had some great conversations about news product thinking on the podcast before, but it's a rich topic that's constantly changing, which is why I am really thrilled to have Feli Carrique with us today. Feli is the executive director of the News Product Alliance, a community for people who strategically align business, audience, and technology goals while integrating journalism ethics. Feli is an Argentinian journalist and a product thinker working at the intersection of media, technology, and sustainability. In her previous role as innovation director at Sembra Media, she worked with news organizations across Latin America, Spain, and the United States to promote innovation and lead product design and systems development for the whole organization. She was also the lead analyst on a recent Inflection Point International report published by Sembra Media, which analyzed the innovations, challenges, and threats facing news entrepreneurs across Latin America, Africa, and Southeast Asia. Feli is a professor at the Catholic University of Argentina, where she co-created the first news product class in Latin America, and she's joining us today from Buenos Aires, and we couldn't be more thrilled. Feli, thank you so much for doing this. Let's just start kind of broadly. Tell us a little bit about your career, how you ended up where you are, and then segue into news product and how you started getting into that and thinking about product as a news and journalism discipline.
First, thank you so much for having me. I am really happy to be here, and everyone in my family is very happy that I get a place in which I can speak about product and other people want to hear me. So
Absolutely.
So thank you for the first question. I'm just going to start with saying, okay, so I am a journalist and I went to journalism school, and I deeply believe that accurate information representing diverse perspectives and realities empowers communities to make informed decisions in their daily lives, and that would help us create more just and fair societies. So I have that deep commitment with the journalism and that deep calling about journalism. However, I even when I was at J school, I always knew I didn't want to become a reporter. So I was always looking for ways in which I could support the journalism industry, especially because I was always confronted to this idea of industry crisis, which I'm sure you're familiar with.
I talk about it a lot.
So I remember being
Yeah.
So I remember being 19 years old in J school and listening to some professors even tell me that you're never going to get a job. This is awful. Journalism's not going to exist anymore. You're delusional. And even though that would pose a limitation for some, it wasn't a limitation for me. It became like my own personal challenge. I want to solve this. Why is it dying? This cannot die. This is really important. What are the ways in which what we can do to save it? What we can do to make it not fail? This is very important. This needs to exist. So that was always my focus, and that's how I got into product. Right. So I was faced with a challenge. And I wanted to gather all the tools that I could to try and solve it and support the work of people that are literally putting their lives in danger to get the truth and information out there. So I think that that's my approach towards how I got to be interested in news product and everything that comes with trying to understand all of the sides of what journalism is. So I interned at digital publication. I had my first job at a major publication here in Argentina's innovation team, um, that helped me think of journalism in a broader way. It's not just reporting is how we present it, what's the experience of the information, how we distribute it. So during that time, I even spent time studying web design, how to mark up a site, how to use different tools, got some data analysis skills, and applied them to my job. And understanding how tech interacted made it easier for me to understand how to juggle all these different things while we were approaching a different era or a different moment in the journalism history. So eventually I got into strategy, and then I came to work to Sembra Media, which is a nonprofit that helps media entrepreneurs develop sustainable business models, and then took more of a tech role that was leaning into product, and finally becoming their innovation director. And as you can see, this is a pretty winding path.
Yep.
So, and includes a little bit of different things. And I have to say that at some point this was very confusing for me, because I wasn't really sure how this was going to play in my career. I felt a bit lost, but the thing is, this is actually pretty common to people who actually ended up doing product work in news, because we come from such different paths and journeys. And I was lucky that I finally was able to put a name to what I was doing and met my people at the first SourceCon product. And after that, I kept collaborating and meeting more product thinkers like me from the MPA community. And I wanted to work to make sure that other product thinkers felt the same way I did, and that they were empowered to continue leading the transformation and embracing the uniqueness of being able to integrate all of these different disciplines towards creating an information product that people and communities actually want to read and want to consume. So I think it was a bit long, my answer, but hope it.
No, it was a great answer. I tell you, there's a couple of immediate things that jumped out at me, and also about how I think about what we do, right? First of all, when I got into this job, I've had my own people say, "What are you, crazy?" But I was always compelled by the idea that we have more consumers of our core product, journalism, than ever, by a lot. Like whatever people's dream was as peak print era, we have many, 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 many more consumers of the product. So that is something you can build towards. This is not this, as I say, buggy whip industry. This is not the buggy whip industry. People want more buggy whips than ever. It is how you build the distribution and commercial models to meet that demand and sustain it. So I understood that, or felt the immediate kinship with your comments. The other thing is, this is an industry which people forget had an incredible history of innovation. It really invested in developing all sorts of innovative technologies and techniques for a really long time. And frankly, in the print era, the miracle of having your last reporter do something at midnight and have that paper on people's doorsteps or at the railway station at 5 the next morning is kind of miraculous. It was a lot of innovation went into that. So part of what I think we need to do as an industry is reattach ourselves to innovation like we would have 100 years ago, frankly, and really develop all sorts of new ways to communicate what we do. So I think what you've described is excellent. So let's get into product thinking, because that framing will be new to people. I don't think it should be all that new, again, because at the end of the day, there was a lot of experimentation and innovation in how journalism was delivered. But in this moment, how do you say what product thinking is as being different from what people were doing before?
This is a great question, because it comes down to something that we've been working around, which is to establish a common definition of what product means in the news industry, right? Because product thinking and product management is not a new concept, and it's been around in tech and even in marketing for a long, long time. But what's new is how we are applying its tools to developing informational products and news-based products for people. So trying to figure how this plays out in the puzzle that the journalism industry already is, it's one of the challenges we do have while trying to bring this framework towards the newsroom. So what we understand with byproduct is anything that an organization creates for an audience in mind. And this audience can be inside or outside your organization. For instance, you can build a newsletter for an audience, or you could build a CMS having your journalists in mind, right? So the idea is that anything that you build and create for an audience to solve a user need and support your organizational mission, it's a product. So that product needs to create an exchange of value. And that exchange of value can take many forms. It could be money to support a subscription, a contribution, time and attention spent on reading an article, data provided, surveys, registration forms, and so on. So what a product thinker does, or a product thinker does, is connects the dots between audience, business, and technology to create these products that have an audience in mind, front and center of everything that we do. And it's a mindset that focuses on putting the product and its ability to succeed with an audience in the center of the organization. So product thinking can help solve problems like what we were referring to as the journalism crisis. Shifting the focus to audience needs and allowing the different stakeholders within the organization to pursue that same goal.
Could you play out an example of just how that would be applied in real world context, about, if you step through thinking about an audience and then how you build product around that discipline about thinking about the audience? And then I want to talk about how that may or may not impact the journalism that's being delivered. But let's start with sort of, if you could think of an example, or either one you've seen, about how people work through this discipline of product thinking.
Let's figure, for instance, I'm going to use an actual case of a media organization that I know. So they understood that visual journalism had a lot of power in transmitting complex ideas, but they were working in Paraguay, which is in South America. And one of the problems Paraguay has is that they have one of these lowest connectivity velocities in the continent. So what they first started to try out was video. And the thing was that connectivity was really slow. People were not being able to actually download and see the video without interruption. So stories weren't being as powerful as they could there. And the other thing was, if they wanted to use their mobile data to watch those videos, it would be very expensive for them. And because the country is very unequal and has a lot of people that do not have access to high mobile connectivity at a low rate, they realized that video wasn't cutting what they needed and was not informing the community they wanted to be informed. But the thing is, they discovered that most of their community were using WhatsApp, and WhatsApp for most plans for most mobile plans in Latin America is free. So any data that you send using that messenger, it's for free. So you couldn't send videos, but you were very free to send infographics via WhatsApp. and that wouldn't cost anything for the person that was consuming it. So you would be able to get to a community that otherwise would not be able to access your content and your information. And yeah, it's a bit less high tech, it's a bit more lo-fi, but it informs the people that you want to be informed. They even developed a podcast that they distributed as a WhatsApp audio file.
That's
So
great.
yeah, it might not have been through Spotify or Apple Music, but they got to the people that they wanted to listen to that information. And the audience was grateful because they could access a content that otherwise they wouldn't be able to with that ease, with that ease of experience. So that for me, it's an example of how product and focusing on the actual needs and actually being close enough to your audience to know what are the challenges, barriers, and frictions they have when they try to access an information makes all the difference.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And let's talk for a minute about whether and how product thinking changes the journalism that's created to be delivered, right? So those examples you gave, video storytelling is, it has its own drivers and compelling aspects, right? It's less heavy in terms of what you're saying, but the visuals are extremely powerful, right? A WhatsApp graphic is super available, but also quite succinct, right? You're talking about a sentence or two, something like that. And then a podcast could be a very long and elaborate and very involved conversation that goes really in depth in a lot of different ideas. How do you see it as organizations creating journalism and then finding just different ways to deliver that journalism, or is this product thinking, does it change the kind of journalism people do, change the kind of journalism that's created?
Well, you can have both,
Okay.
right? So you can apply a product mindset to think about distribution, but you could also apply a product mindset while creating stories in the newsroom. And that might not necessarily be the product management function that actually exists, and it's a function on itself in some media organizations, but it might be applying product thinking to what we are reporting on.
Yeah.
Right. So focusing on what is that people really need to know, and why are the reasons people are coming to us to try and understand what are the stories that offer the most value to this community. So yes, you could take product thinking into that realm to start thinking of what kind of journalism we do and what kind of journalism drives the most value to our users. Yeah. And that does not mean that that this can be done without journalism ethics and actually having editorial criteria, because it's not about, okay, this drives a lot of clicks, so it seems people want to read a lot about the Kardashians. Yeah. But because that's not the thing. When we're speaking about product thinking in the newsroom, that's actually one of the challenges that we have, that it's not common to the rest of the industries, which is we have a responsibility towards our communities and our audiences to provide information that enriches the public debate and engages people towards a democratic society. So that being said, and trying to go back to what we were saying, you get both. You can use product thinking as to how to distribute information, but you can also take some of the learnings and some of the tools that are useful to your organization to start thinking, what are the stories that provide the most value to our audiences, and how can we concentrate resources towards those stories, and maybe not necessarily all of these 140 other stories that we're publishing per day that get very low readership.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'll tell you an example. It's been around
Yeah.
for a number of years, but I'm in the Washington D.C. area, right? And so when people think about news about the weather, right? They don't really think
Mhm.
about that as it's mostly, do you tell people to carry an umbrella or put on a coat, right? It's not considered very high value. It comes from free from the Weather Service. The rest of it. Actually, what the Washington Post developed is a product. You get a newsletter every day with real meteorologists and journalists going into some detail about what's happening with weather systems, what the whole week looks like. It actually informs you quite a bit, and they then go online and actively engage with the public. And it turns out there's a lot of people who want to know more than just, should I take an umbrella today or not? And whereas people thought about weather as just being something on TV or get from other sources, essentially the Washington Post has developed this huge audience that's really centered in, what do people really care about? Not what did I expect them to care about, but really thinking about, is there an audience who really cares about this? And I think that can be applied in a lot of different arenas. But again, they deliver it in a lot of different ways. But it is centered first and foremost on reader interest and reader need, right? And keeping that focus.
Sometimes product work and actually conducting audience research and really including the audience perspective on what we're trying to do and offer might be really counterintuitive, because we might learn a lot of things that really challenge our preconceptions of what people want when they approach a news site or open
Yeah.
a news app. And that's why some innovations might be pretty simple, but actually counterintuitive to what we expect and what we've been taught in
Yeah.
centuries of journalism experience. Well, century.
Yeah. No, that's great. So let's talk a little bit about the News Product Alliance. It's relatively new. Tell us what its goals are, what your role is, and what you hope to achieve with the alliance.
I'm going to start by sharing something pretty basic about the MPA, but we now host a community of 1,400 news product professionals around the world. That includes a combination of news product managers, but also journalists, developers, technologists, data scientists, and other media tech adjacent roles with very diverse backgrounds. So these are 1,400 people that are leading change in media organizations
Mm.
and trying to lead their own organizations towards an audience and product centric approach of news production. And this presents two fundamental challenges and opportunities for the MPA. So, one would be supporting the creation of this common definition of what product is for news and creating the best practices that spur further innovation and an audience driven development across the news industry. Um, and as I mentioned, while upholding what journalism ethics are, right? But
Mhm.
the other challenge and opportunity is to how can we support all of these change makers in their own contexts. So facing resistance while pushing for industry level transformation, it's not easy if you're alone. And change resistance is pretty common. It's not that it's not our industry that is lazy and doesn't want to innovate and move forward.
Yeah.
It's human nature. So these are all professionals that are trying to push for change. So they are mostly facing resistance, and for that we really want to create a space and a community where they can feel less alone, recognized, member of a group, and and for that we need to recognize there's no single path to this discipline, and that we also need to diversify the field of news product thinkers and leaders, and break down barriers for entry, and create community support, and a space where everyone feels comfortable just asking the most basic questions,
Yeah.
and having the community answer and help them, because otherwise experience is atomized and in different places. But it's very powerful when you get all of those experiences into one place and into one safe space. So what we're doing is we're trying to elevate the discipline of news product management, and also expanding the diversity of news product thinkers in decision making roles. So yeah, we do think these change makers have the power to push forward our industry and are key to building sustainable and ethical news organizations.
It is interesting. I actually find the industry now to really be pretty creative and innovative, right? There was a period where it wasn't always like that. And by the way, having a product that makes a ton of money tends to stifle anybody's interest in change, right? But you get to a place where you're not making a ton of money, and it tends to drive the creativity. But you notice you get resistance. Is it the classic we've never done that kind of resistance, or we've always done it this other way, or I just don't believe people will be interested? I mean, it's just that institutional entropy, which again, that infects all sorts of organizations. What are some of the common challenges people face as they get into the space?
Well, all of the ones you mentioned, yes, absolutely. But there's also some other resistance that might not be so conscious in the sense of someone saying, no, we're not going to do this, but it's actually lack of communication in between areas. But this is organizational. This is how organizations work. Like, this can be in journalism, or it can be in automobile development. I don't know. So building bridges in between these different separate areas of an organization is one of the barriers, and it's one of the challenges most innovators and product thinkers face when they are trying to push for something new.
Interesting. So getting to people who want to get into the space, what kind of advice would you, again, think of a young journalist or technologist out there who is excited about this idea of ways to deliver journalism and meet the needs of the public. What kind of advice would you give somebody who wants to start a conversation in their institution about this? Probably in many places they don't have a news product person, right? Maybe they, what kind of advice, if somebody who wants to get in this field, what kind of advice would you give them?
So I'm going to start. So I have two. One is more basic, one is more personal. I'm going to start with the kind of standard basic one. But what I would say is there are many things, but there are some journalism skills that are actually very transferable to product work. So the first thing I would say to someone who's looking to start is, okay, let's identify what are the skills that you have or that you bring because of your journalistic background, and own them and take them to your more productive focused role or approach that you want to take. So for example, interviewing and reporting, it's not that far from conducting audience research. What do we need to refine to actually get you to conduct audience research from the skills you already have, or writing a nut graph, setting goals, and clarifying value proposition? Pitching a story, it's not that far away from pitching a product, a newsletter, and getting buy-in from your superior to move forward with something, or managing an editorial calendar. You could manage a roadmap. You just need to start owning the skills that you can transfer from your journalistic experience to a more news product experience. And the second one, and this is a personal thing, and it might be completely based on a prejudice, that is, journalists are curious.
Yeah.
So it would be to apply that curiosity to your own industry. So imagine that you're writing a piece. Why do people read the stories that we publish? Why do we organize work in this way? How does my organization business models work? How, and start making some of those hard questions, having your industry and your organization in mind and your audience in mind. So that would be for me a way of getting closer into the what product thinking and the product mindset is.
That's great advice. That is amazingly good advice, right? You take all those disciplines and turn them into this space. There's a lot of focus on trying to find out, for want of a better term, the truth or the facts, right? And if you turn that lens to the truth of the facts about what consumers really want and how they really like to get it, I think that's really compelling. And also examining your own organization. So you strike me as somebody who really loves to hear about creativity and new ideas and is sort of delighted by creativity. What's delighted you recently? What is a new idea or a new product or a new approach recently where you were like, wow, that's fascinating, And also, as part of this, by the way, because we're in the United States, we tend to have a U.S. focus and rarely see the world outside of our borders. My guess is there's tremendous experimentation going on around the world. You gave the example in Paraguay, but other places. But so it's a long way of saying what's delighted you recently or you found interesting, and where's some interesting experimentation going on?
This is hard because it's hard for me to actually pick, but because there's so many, and
Yeah.
it's true. But one thing I would say that might be a disappointing answer, because it's not. I'm going to show some flashy, innovative piece that I saw, which is that I would like to highlight that a lot of developments and a lot of things that are being pushed now are not necessarily big or flashy,
Yeah.
but rather it's a drive for making everything a little better, one step at a time, and adjusting what we do to better interact with audiences and community. So it's not this big special using VR technology, but it's rather making some minor change that increases our open rate by 10%. Those are the things that excite me. And I know
That's
I
great.
seem creative, but I'm very driven by that minor changes that actually have a huge impact in what we get our audience to read and do. So I would think I would say that's the thing that's impressing me the most these days. And around your question of the difference between the U.S. industry and the product development and the rest of the world, so I would say the news product discipline is pretty young everywhere, and that development might differ from place to place. But however, I don't think that national boundaries might be the main cause for that, but rather like resource availability, connectivity, and news consumption habits. Um, an example would be one very important part of product, as we mentioned, is experimenting, trying new things, or at least a minimum version of new things, and incorporating learnings to make said product better. But in places where resources are scarcer, it is harder to get buy-in from leadership to appoint resources and staff to experimentation. So even though the approach product proposes can actually help us save money and resources in the long run, as I said, it's still a bit counterintuitive, and it makes it harder for innovators and product thinkers to get their ideas out. Still, I am optimistic that things are starting to shift and the product mindset is starting to show in how we are producing news products by now. And one note, though, that I would like to make about this difference is that because what makes a difference is resource availability, connectivity, or news consumption habits, there might be a lot in common from what happens in a local community in the US and a local community in Argentina.
Sure.
And it might be more in common what happens at the New York Times and at a big media organization in Buenos Aires than the New York Times and the small local newsroom. So having the opportunity of getting a global perspective of what's going on in the media industry might actually help us get hints from rather unexpected places.
That's fantastic. This has just been a really good and rich conversation. First of all, just thank you. Thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for leading the charge and driving change and innovation in the industry, which again, we're having to rediscover, but we have it in the industry's DNA. It has been at various times a deeply innovative industry. And also, I have to tell you, there's something about the pace of a daily news operation or a constant news operation that I think sometimes lends itself to the ability to innovate. Even if you think of the classic print news product, they were, they started with a blank page every night, right? You're creating something every day, and to the extent you can keep that pace and infuse some experimentation, I think that's exactly what we need in this moment. So listen, I want to thank you for taking the time to do this. Thank you for what you're doing. And you. I'm definitely going to want to have another one of these conversations. So, and any way we can help the News Product Alliance, please let us know that, okay?
Thank you so much for having me, and thanks to the News Media Alliance for hosting these conversations. I really appreciate having a space to discuss how we can push this industry forward. And thank you so much, David, for such good questions.
Great. Thank you very much.